Hello, I'm Dave Winter. I'm a trustee of the LMS Carriage Association. 2014 marks the 175th anniversary of the railway arriving in Derby and the start of train building that was to transform the town into an industrial and engineering heartland. To help celebrate this milestone in Derby's railway history, we'd like to show you how carriage building was carried out in the 1930s, courtesy of a film made available by the British Film Institute. This film was made by the LMS Railway in 1933 and shows the building of a third-class corridor coach at their Litchurch Lane works. The site was spread over more than 230 acres. Carriages first rolled out of these works in 1878 under the then Carriage and Wagon superintendent, Thomas Clayton. When this film was made, the LMS chief mechanical engineer was William Stanley, later to become Sir William Stanley. Here he is seen poring over drawings. His carriage and wagon superintendent was a Mr. Ernest Pugson, who introduced arc welding and composite carriage construction. So where do you start when building a carriage? It might be worth starting at the bottom and working your way up. For a carriage, this means the wheels. The wheel sets were made in three components: the axle, the two wheel centres and a tyre for each. First of all, the axle is turned from a large bar that is ground to fine tolerances and surface finish, as can be seen here. This is to ensure an interference fit with the wheel centre and that there is also a smooth bearing surface. Next is the wheel centre. The centre is machined out on a huge turret lathe to ensure that there is an interference fit that will grip the axle. The tyres are machined in pairs, of course, and checked before being transferred to the heating ring. The reason for heating the tyres is to expand them so that the wheel centres can be inserted. As the tyre cools, it forms a very tight fit on the centre. A retaining ring is hammered into place as the final fix. As you can see, most things will be fixed with a hammer. After the wheels have been assembled to the axle in a similar manner, they are then transferred to the balancing station. This rig spins the assembled wheel set while supported on spring-loaded axle boxes. As the out-of-balance wheel set gets up to speed, it starts to bounce. Chalk is then offered to the spinning wheel to mark the peak of the oscillation on the wheel. The wheel is then brought to a halt and chalk marks found. This enables the skilled worker to mark where the counterbalance weights need to be fitted. Once fitted, the wheel set is spun up again. This time they'll bob on, and he knows it. A job well done. With the wheel set now balanced, so that it doesn't spill the passengers' drinks at 90 miles an hour, it's removed from the rig and skillfully manoeuvred to join the rest waiting outside to become assembled into a bogie. This was still the era of hot rivets, large castings and forgings. The majority of LMS carriages at this time consisted of a steel chassis and bogies with a wooden body on the top. Standard section steel girders stored at the back of the works were brought into the workshops for cutting to length and preparing for assembly. With the metalwork cut to shape, they were held in jigs and riveted together to form the carriage chassis and, as seen here, the bogie frames. Glowing hot rivets were thrown around with precision before being inserted into the growing bogie frame. Held firmly in place, they were hammered flat to form an extremely tight join. A railway carriage is made up of many differently shaped items, as specified by the design engineer, such as buffers to withstand impact, and coupling hooks to take the strain. All of these components lend themselves to different methods of manufacture. Derby Carriage Works had the manufacturing capability to do it all under one roof. Let's take a look at some of these processes, starting with the forge. The forge is a place where large lumps of metal are heated until white hot and then hammered into shape with huge but nimble mechanical hammers. These hammers incorporate upper and lower dies in the form of the desired shape of the end product. This is a team process that requires skill and awareness, as the white hot billet is swiftly swung around the forge and placed on the lower die. This is a time-critical activity to get the hot metal formed before it is cooled. The upper die is hammered down repeatedly until the hot billet is formed into the desired shape. This process creates a flash edge around the forging, and so the newly formed hook is swiftly transferred to a press to have it removed. And out pops your red hot hook. Once cooled, it can be added to the carriage chassis. Other components require a different forming process known as casting, such as these buffer housings or these axle boxes. Casting is undertaken in the foundry, and this is where the metal is melted to a liquid form and then poured into sand moulds before being allowed to cool. Throughout this film, it's interesting to see how unprotected the workers were compared to what would be expected today, but that was the norm back in the 1930s. Rolled up sleeves, waistcoat and flat cap was the workwear of the day in the foundry, as if acting as servants to the molten metal that they were respectfully pouring into the moulds. With all the components made and assembled, they are brought together to form the rolling chassis upon which the carriage body will be built. And so the gradually forming carriage is moved to the next stage, body construction. The majority of carriages built during this period had a wooden body built onto a steel chassis. This required a plentiful supply of timber, and for Great Britain in the 1930s, the Empire could be called upon to supply the required woods that today are protected. More native woods were also used, such as oak and ash. The wood store at Litchurch Lane was massive. Huge tree trunks were taken from the stockpile and transferred into the sawmill for cutting into the various base forms for subsequent machining into carriage body components. Some of the trunks of wood were enormous, and they needed equally large machines to saw them, such as this horizontal bandsaw. The speed of the saw was extremely fast to cut through the enormous block of wood, like a knife through butter, and with little thought to dust extraction. The rough sawn wood was then transferred for further machining, such as planing and thicknessing, as can be seen here. Once the outside dimensions were achieved, further machining operations were undertaken to make the joints. Here the stringer has a lap joint cut in it before it is placed on the chassis to form the base of the carriage body. Next come the uprights, which are cut by hand on the bandsaw to form the curve of the carriage side, before being transferred to the router bench for trimming to shape. Watch your fingers! The joints are then added, followed by the mortises into which the horizontal frame members will be fitted. All the required holes are drilled at once in the vertical member, after which it is transferred to a finishing bench for a final inspection and sand. The stack of completed verticals are then transferred to the assembly bench, where the carriage side is constructed in sections for eventual assembly. Of course, carriages need doors, and again these are made of wood. This one is nearly 90 years old and was made at Derby. As you can imagine, carriages have a lot of doors, and so the process of making them became semi-automated, as can be seen here. The assembly jig has set positions for each of the members. Once secured in place, the jig presses the joints together as the operator taps them into place with a hammer. See, a hammer fixes most things. Whilst the frame is still secured, holes are drilled and screws inserted using another amazing belt-driven contraption before the new door frame is released. A quick check is made to see the door is rigid and that there are no steps in the joins. Of course, none are found. It's built in Derby Carriage Works. Perfect. Once the floor had been completed, it was a case of fitting the pre-assembled sections together. The sides, followed by the ends, then the roof. With carriage construction, it's a case of many hands make light work. The pre-assembled carriage side frames are lifted into place and secured under the direction of the foreman, who is the chap wearing the bowler hat. It's interesting to see how young some of the lads look, as they started their working life at the age of 14. The works force had a large age range, with the more experienced carrying out the more skilled tasks, and passing their knowledge on to the next generation. With the sides and ends of the carriage fitted, attention moved on to the roof. The ribs were secured to the cant rail at the top before the curved metal sheets were fitted. The joins were sealed using a putty-like substance known in the works as yellow peril. A sealing band was laid on top before another dollop of yellow peril was added. A curved metal strip was then placed on top. And how do you put in a screw? With a hammer, of course, before screwing down with a brace and bit. So far we've seen a very male-orientated workforce, but they also employed a large number of women engaged on the more detailed work. Varnishing and French polishing the panelling of the carriage interior was seen very much as a skill that ladies excelled in, especially in the making of the leather straps that were used to open and close the carriage door windows, called drop lights. Luggage rack netting was also a female preserve, and miles of netting was produced to supply the needs of the carriages being rolled out of the works. Finally, fitting out of the carriage involved the installation of glass and the interior items such as the luggage racks and lights. From construction, the carriage moved to the paint shop to have its livery applied. There was no spray painting here. Everything was applied by hand, including the lining. The only exceptions were the logos and numbers, which were transfers by this stage. Can you tell what it will be? Why, LMS, of course. Only the best. A final polish and the carriage was ready to be rolled out into the sunshine for the first time as a completed vehicle. It was loaded onto the traverser to move across the works. There was one last stage before this newly completed carriage could be handed over to join the operational fleet. Testing. Oil boxes are filled, as are the water tanks. Vacuum brakes get tested, as does the steam heating. To conclude the testing and pass the carriage as fit for use, the foreman comes to inspect and confirm that everything is as it should be. Once he is happy, he calls on the loco to take the brand new carriage away. And so the skills of the wheel balancer, the forge master, the foundry master, the machinist, the joiner, the painter, and all the other skilled people located at the Derby Carriage Works come together in a cohesive team to produce a quality rail vehicle that would last some 30 years or more, serving the nation's transport needs. Of course, there's always one straggler. Long may train building continue in Derby, maintaining part of the country's skills, capability and pride. Here's to the next 175 years.